Every single generation had their icons. The 50s had Elvis, the 60s had Woodstock, the 70s had disco, and the 80s and the 90s, we had Hooters. I don't mean those Hooters, I mean the Hooters restaurant. You know, the tight white shirts, the orange lycra shorts, the white sneakers, and the ruffled socks with pantyhose. Yeah, we had that. Let me paint a little picture for you. It's 1989. The Berlin Wall has just fallen. Michael Keaton is playing Batman, and Hooters just opened up onto the interstate. You pull into the parking lot, you see the bright orange lycra shirts, the pantyhose, those white sneakers. You knew exactly where you're going, and it wasn't your daddy's steakhouse. Hooters wasn't about fine dining. It was about fun dining. It was about wings, beer, football, sports on TV, those neon lights with a little country music in the background, a little hair band metal, and some hip hop all mixed in on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday night. Hooters was the original man cave before a man cave became a man cave. It just had a whole lot more lycra orange shorts walking around. The uniforms were absolutely iconic. The orange shorts, the white tank tops, they meant more to anything anybody else wanted to look at back in the 90s. They were in movies. They featured them in rock and roll bands. It was a cultural phenomenon with that uniform. You instantly knew exactly where that girl was going to go to work. It was like the golden arches of McDonald's, the red and white striped can of Coca-Cola. Hooters had their signature look, and it was a white t-shirt and those orange lycra shorts. Everybody knows what they look like. A lot of companies even try to imitate them. I remember here locally, we had a company called Calico Jacks. They had everything Hooters had, except for their shorts were pink. That's it. But guess what? They didn't make it either, because you can't duplicate an original icon. But here's the thing. Hooters just wasn't about the uniform. It was a place people went. It was a place where people gathered, watched sports, had their beer, had their wings. And let's talk about the Hooters wings. They were something of that era as well. They came out in those little baskets with a little paper on it. They were crispy, fried, dry, wet, hot, mild. They came out with that little celery stick that nobody ever touched, with a thing as a side of ranch that you can dip your wings into. Wings weren't even a thing until Hooters made wings a thing. Before Buffalo Wild Wings, you had Hooters wings. That's the way it was back then. And when you went to Hooters, everybody ordered wings. They started having them 12, 24, 36, a whole bunch of different orders. And everybody got them. Anytime I went to Hooters, somebody at the table ordered the wings. And for some reason, when you're around your buddies, watching football on those big box TVs and later a flat screen TV, watching a Mike Tyson fight or the Cowboys or the Steelers or the Miami Dolphins on TV, and you're having some beer and some hot wings, and you're with your buddies, that was the best time on earth at that moment. You would see everybody there. You would see cultural diversity from one spectrum to the other. You get guys that are construction workers with their orange and yellow vests with their hard hats walking into Hooters. You'd have businessmen that used to travel come in there with their three-piece suits on, carrying their briefcases. Hooters didn't discriminate against anything, except for if you're a guy trying to wear the outfit. But other than that, Hooters was open to everybody. And from all walks of life, everybody walked into Hooters and enjoyed that surrounding and what Hooters had to offer. Beer, hot wings, and hot chicks. That's right. I said hot chicks, because you know what? Hooters girls weren't just waitresses. They were like local celebrities. They even had calendars featured some of the hottest Hooters girls across the country. I was even lucky enough to date one when I was in Colorado Springs at one time. That's right. I was lucky enough to date a Hooters girl. Worked in a Hooters in Colorado Springs inside the Citadel Mall. And you know what the coolest thing about that was? We got to go to an event in Winter Park, Colorado. And they were introducing all kinds of stuff, new kinds of beverages. That's when Zima came out with that new malt beverage. And I traveled there with the whole district of Hooters. I got to go down the ski slopes, which is Hooters girls after Hooters girls. I might as well have been at a Playboy Bunny Ranch. It was surrounded by beautiful women, and every single one of them had, at one point in time, most of the women that were there at this ski ranch were all Hooters girls that were featured inside a calendar at one particular year or so. It was amazing. A Hooters girl back then, well, you might as well have been a supermodel to most of these guys. The 90s just amplified Hooters. It was everywhere. Hooters was in the mainstream, expanded everywhere. You had Hooters Airlines, you had Hooters tournaments, you had Hooters NASCAR sponsorships, you had Hooters with brand, a lifestyle, and some ways rebelling against the buttoned-up corporate world. Hooters was everything and everywhere in the 90s. And Hooters just wasn't about the brand. It was about breaking the norms of society. It wasn't politically correct. They knew they hired beautiful women, big booties, knew they had to wear those tiny little shorts and those pantyhose and the white socks and the sneakers. They knew that. You knew when you applied for that job what you were going to get into. And it's funny because most of the women that are in that probably think of that time as the greatest time of their lives when they were a Hooters girl. That's right. They were called Hooters girls. They had a title. And if you told somebody you were dating a Hooters girl, oh, Lord, you might as well have been saying you were dating a Victoria's Secret model. And Hooters was a lot more than just a restaurant. It was like a cultural marker. It reminded us sometimes the best nights out don't need to be with a tablecloth, a waiter, or a waitress. It could just be with a really beautiful girl with a tight white t-shirt, tight lycra orange shorts, and some sneakers, serving you beer and hot wings while you watch the game. So when we talk about the 80s and the 90s, you could talk about the Cold War ending, which was a big deal. We could talk about the grunge music. You could talk about Michael Jordan. You could talk about when AOL began their first dial-up. But let's not forget that neon glow of the Hooters sign and a Friday night calling you and your boys out to watch the game. Because Hooters wasn't just a restaurant back then. It was an era, an attitude. Because Hooters just wasn't a restaurant back then. It was part of American culture. It was part of us, part of something that will live forever in our minds and our memories. Some of the best times some people had were at Hooters, and it will continue to live on. Even though Hooters isn't what it used to be, it's still going to be an American icon that will be remembered in pop culture forever. Well, that's it for today. Join me next time for a little chit-chat, some observation, and some good old-fashioned conversation. Thanks.